Hey guys, it's McCready Musings here, and welcome back to the History of Magic the Gathering, told through a card from every set. This week, oh boy, we have some powerful cards to discuss. We'll be going to the Arthurian world of Eldraine, which is a bit grim, and that's grim with two M's. Then we'll be returning to Theros and exploring its underworld in Theros Beyond Death. Then, if you wouldn't very much mind, you can be my companion as we look at Ikoria, the Lair of Behemoths. We'll take our look at the most recently released official core set with core set 2021, and finally we'll be returning to Zendikar with Zendikar Rising. Let's get going! In October of 2019, a set came out which would stand head and shoulders above the rest, and which reigned as the king of standard for the next 2 years. I'm talking, of course, about Throne of Eldraine. Regarded as the most powerful set in recent memory, with its most powerful cards ranking among the strongest of all time, Eldraine is certainly a memorable set. The world of Eldraine is based on Grimm's fairy tales and Arthurian legend, with just a sprinkle of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream thrown in there for good measure. The marquee mechanic of the set is Adventure. Cards with adventures are all creatures on their right hand side, but instants or sorceries on their left. They can be cast as an instant or sorcery first before going into exile. You can pop them on a little I am on an adventure token if you have one to hand. You can then cast them out of exile as a creature. Alternatively, you can just bring them out from your hand as a creature right away. This is really powerful. Magic, at its heart, is a game about value and making every card count. You want to do as much stuff as possible whilst using up as few cards as possible. Since cards with adventure are functionally two cards stapled together, the value they can provide is incredible, and many of them are also very aggressively costed. Beanstalk Giant's sorcery effect only costs one more mana than Rampant Growth, but also provides a roughly 7/7 body on the same card. Murderous Rider is Hero's Downfall, stapled to a 2/3 knight with lifelink. Realmcloak Giant lets you wipe the board and then slam out a Vigilant 7/7. This effect even spares giants, so if you build your deck synergistically, you can kill all of your opponent's stuff and leave yourself untouched. Adventures get even more powerful due to a suite of other cards which were built to support them. Edgewall Innkeeper lets you draw a card whenever you cast the creature side of an adventure, and Lucky Clover doubles the instant sorcery half of all your adventure cards, making these cards, which are already functionally 2-in-1, act like they're 3 cards all stuck together. Adventure was so good that Lucky Clover ended up getting banned from Standard in October of 2020. In fact, so far, no less than 7 cards from Eldraine have ended up banned in one format or another, typically several. But when I talk about super powerful cards from Eldraine, naturally all of our minds go to the same place. That super powerful Simic Fairy. That's right, I'm talking about Maraleaf Pixie. For only 1 green and 1 blue, Maraleaf Pixie is a 2/2 flyer who can tap for green or blue mana. I mean, that's just insane. Llanowar Elves, forget about them. Wind Drake, more like Wind Fake. I'm sure that we all decisively agree. Okay. This is obviously a lie. You know the card that's really going to be my card of this set. You probably knew before you even clicked on the video. This card needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it one anyway. I met a traveller from a basic land who said, "Two vast and trunkless elks of cardboard stand on the battlefield. Near them, in the wilds, half asleep, a powerful fae lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and buff fairy abs tell that its designer poorly playtested this card. Loyalty abilities survive, stamped on this powerful thing, the crown that mocked them and the food tokens that fed. And on the trading card, these words appear. My name is, Okomandius, Thief of Crowns. Look upon my elks, ye mighty, and despair." Oh, Oko. Pretty much inarguably the most powerful planeswalker ever printed. Banned in Standard, then Brawl, then Pioneer, then Historic, then Modern, and finally Legacy. But what is it that makes Oko so strong? At a cursory glance, Oko doesn't appear all that intimidating. Food tokens can be sacrificed for 2 mana to give you life. Not an amazingly powerful ability. Turning a creature into a 3/3 elk? Why, that's just a bad removal effect. And then a weird ultimate that just swaps things round? But all of these abilities synergize so perfectly and make Oko an incredible card. First of all, notice how both of Oko's initial 2 abilities grant him loyalty. Normally, planeswalkers have an ability which grants loyalty and one which takes it away, and then an ultimate. Given that Oko's ultimate only costs 5 and he starts at 4, you'll be able to use his ultimate the turn after he comes into play, regardless of whether you're making food or turning a creature into an elk. Now, I was also being slightly disingenuous when I referred to Oko's ability as a bad removal effect, his second ability, that is. After all, this is basically a slightly narrower version of Generous Gift or Beast Within, and those cards have the same mana value as Oko. And since this adds, rather than subtracting loyalty, turn after turn, you can just keep turning your opponent's most powerful threats into elks. Plus, nobody said you had to target your opponent's stuff. Use this to turn after you've made yourself some food, and transform your hamper of desserts into a free forest creature. Which brings us on to his ultimate. So you spent the past few turns transforming all of your opponent's biggest bombs into elks, and making a handful of food tokens for yourself. Smash out Oko's ultimate, and you can hand over all the pointless pies to your opponent and just steal their whole board. So I have laid out a few of the reasons why Oko is one of the most powerful cards around, but ultimately, all of his strength was for naught. Like Percy Bysshe Shelley's Ozymandias, all of his power ultimately crumbled away to naught and was lost to the sands of time. Or well, the sands of being banned in almost every relevant format, I guess. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Theros Beyond Death burst out of the underworld in January of 2020. This set saw a return to the Greek mythology and enchantment-based plane of Theros. These two themes were welded together pretty excellently with the return of sagas, each of which were used to convey Therosian versions of mythical stories. Although the storytelling in Theros Beyond Death wasn't always spectacular. Theros Beyond Death is unique amongst modern Magic sets for having basically no storyline whatsoever. It's suspected that a Theros Beyond Death novel may have been in the works, but it was cancelled due to the poor reception of the two War of the Spark novels. We could vaguely piece together bits of lore from the cards in the set themselves, and a few little snippets which are posted alongside accompanying their reveals, but these little snippets weren't a great resource. Rather infamously, one of them referred to Theros' sun god as Helios, the name of a Greek sun deity, rather than Heliod, the card's correct name, putting away the paper-thin veil separating Theros from the source material it's based upon. Okay, that was a bit mean. I mean, I genuinely like the Theros sets, and all of their little nods towards Greek mythology. Although they aren't subtle, they do make some very flavourful and evocative cards. Speaking of being flavourful and evocative, Theros Beyond Death's signature new mechanic is Escape. The story of Theros Beyond Death, so much as there is one, is about Elspeth and other lost souls escaping from Theros' underworld. Cards with Escape allow you to pay a cost and exile a number of other cards from your graveyard in order to bring them back into play. This is pretty cool. Your cards are escaping the graveyard, which pretty much directly parallels how they're escaping from the underworld, exiling other cards representing the challenges they're encountering along the way. Elspeth Sun's nemesis is even a planeswalker with the mechanic. She has 3 negative loyalty abilities, so you play her, she'll die, and then escape the underworld, and then die again. Yeah, I don't think this entirely reflects the story they're trying to tell, and that she keeps popping in and out of the afterlife, and this card isn't all that powerful, but still, very interesting. The card which I'll be using to represent the set is yet another super strong Simic card. That's 2 in a row. I was thinking about making it Thassa's Oracle, a powerful alternative win condition, which was printed in this set, and has some notable usage in competitive Commander, but ultimately, I think Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, is just a few notches more iconic. When you play Uro from your hand, it immediately dies, but it gives you 3 life and then lets you draw a card and bring a land from your hand into play. You have to have Uro escape in order to bring it into play properly and not have it die straight away. This is pretty cool. Just like the Titans in Greek mythology, Theros' Titans are sealed in the underworld, although unlike their counterparts, these Titans can burst back out into the world of mortals and break standard in half like it's a twig. Just like Oko, Uro was banned in a bevy of formats: Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Historic, although Uro is currently still allowed to roam free in Legacy. Uro initially plays like a slightly more costly Growth Spiral, a card which was banned in Standard the month before Uro was. But despite its later banning, Uro is significantly stronger. Simic has no difficulty with self-mill or ramp, so if you build your deck correctly, it can be very easy to bring Uro out of the underworld exceedingly early in the game. Having a 6/6 with upside after only a few turns have passed often puts you leagues ahead of your opponent. Plus, Uro is really sticky, so unless they exile it, you can just keep bringing it back again and again. Uro and Krosa, the other Titan in this set, are a reference to the Titan cycle from M11. Like the original Titans, these cards are giants, and have an ability which triggers when they enter the battlefield, and again when they attack. Although Theros Beyond Death, on average, was nowhere near the same power level as Eldraine, a few of the cards, like Uro and Thassa's Oracle, were problematically strong. We ventured into Ikoria, the lair of Behemoths, in May of 2020, except in Asia, which saw the set a month early in April. Ikoria was the first set released after the start of the COVID pandemic, so looking back on it is always quite bittersweet. I ordered a pre-release kit, but my local game store wasn't offering digital pre-releases at that time, so I excitedly assembled the deck, then realised I had no one to play with. The deck just sat there, in its box, all sleeved up and ready to go till I broke it apart and used some of its cards for a deck, which I built several months later. Ikoria was a hugely innovative set, but that's not entirely praise. It pulled the game in a lot of new and interesting directions, but these didn't all pan out fantastically. I'll start with some kind words. It debuted the concept of ability counters. Little counters which grant your creatures keyword abilities like trample, first strike, etc. These slot completely naturally into the game, and it sort of feels amazing to me that they debuted this late. There are a cycle of creatures who have an on-colour ability, or you can cycle them away to put an ability counter on a creature you control, and there's another cycle of creatures who can choose to gain one of two relevant abilities of their colour when they come into play. Both of these are simple, elegant designs, and they demonstrate that ability counters are, I feel, the best innovation of Ikoria. They'll be coming back in New Capenna as well, and probably many more sets to come. Moving a bit more into the negative now, we come to the mutate mechanic. I guess you could describe mutate as controversial. In my opinion, it's a really interesting idea, but one which just doesn't pan out all that well in practice. All cards of mutate are creatures. They can either be cast like usual for their regular cost, or you can play them for an alternative mutate cost by stacking them either on top of or beneath another non-human creature you have in play. The new creature created has the stats of whatever creature is on top of the stack and the abilities of every creature in the mutate stack. If that sounds a bit convoluted, well, honestly that's because it is. The idea is to create a super large creature with a bunch of really awesome abilities, and lots of mutate cards have abilities which trigger whenever the creature mutates. So if you stack enough mutations on top of one creature, it can make you tokens or remove and bounce your opponent's stuff with every subsequent mutation, amongst other beneficial effects. The big weakness of this, though, is that unless you mutate onto a hexproof creature, your opponent can just cast a removal spell on your big doom stack, putting them up hugely in terms of card advantage over you. There was only one context in which mutate really excelled, and that was in mutating Gemraiser on top of Scoot Swarm. Scoot Swarm is a Zendikar Rising card which makes tokens that are copies of itself whenever you play a land, once you've got 6 or more lands in play. This is already tough, because all of Scoot Swarm tokens have the same ability, so they can really get out of control really fast. But if rather than being a 1/1 Scoot Swarm, you've got a mutated 4/4 Gemraiser with trample and reach that keeps cloning itself whenever you play a land, well, your opponents will either need to play a board wipe or they'll be losing the game in pretty short order. Now we come to the most infamous mechanic of the set. For everything else that it did, I feel that ultimately Ikoria lives in the shadow of the Companion mechanic. Companion was an attempt to give commanders to formats outside of Commander. It was an experiment and ultimately an unsuccessful one. 10 companions were printed, one for each colour pair. They don't go into your deck, they go into a little zone outside of the game, and they require you to fulfill certain deck building criteria in order to use them. For example, in order to make Lutri the Spellchaser your companion, your deck needs to be singleton. To use a Bosch or Garuda, your decks need to contain only cards with odd or even mana values respectively, and so on. Even with these deck building restrictions, having a free 8th card in your hand at the start of the game was powerful. Way too powerful, as it turned out, and the entire mechanic needed to be nerfed in order to account for this. Whilst initially you could just play your companion from outside the game, the rules were changed so that you first needed to pay free mana in order to bring your companion into your hand, and only then could you play them. This means that every single companion printed in Ikoria has rules text written on it which doesn't accurately describe how the mechanic works. You need a reprinted version of the card, for example the version of Lurrus which came out with the 2021 Pioneer Challenger decks, in order for reading the card to actually explain the card. Speaking of Lurrus, she'll be our card to represent the set, because in what's becoming a trend in this video, she is absolutely bonkers. Banned in Pioneer, Modern and Legacy prior to the nerf to the companion mechanic, Lurrus was even banned in Vintage, the game's most powerful format. I repeat, she was banned in Vintage. Not restricted, outright banned. The only other cards outright banned in that format are the Conspiracies from Conspiracy, anti-cards, cards which require manual dexterity, cards which have been deemed to be offensive, and Shahrazad. Lurrus is insanely strong. For 3 mana, 2 of which is hybrid black/white, Lurrus is a cat nightmare with a 3/2 stat line, lifelink, and the ability to let you cast a permanent from your graveyard with mana value 2 or less once per turn. A deck building restriction is that none of the permanents in your deck can have a mana value greater than 2. Note, this is permanents, so instants and sorceries are fine. What makes this so insane? Well, for starters, the deck building restriction doesn't really mean a lot in Vintage and Legacy, where the average mana curve is so low. Lurrus's ability to fetch stuff from your graveyard means that if you have a Black Lotus, you can just spend it every turn and then get it back on the next, putting your mana way ahead of where it should be. She's all around a problematic card and is emblematic of the crazy power of the companion mechanic. Core Set 2021 came out in July of 2020. Fun fact, this series began in June of that year, so this set hadn't quite come out yet at that time. In any case, Core Set 2021 is the Teferi set. We return to the continent of Jamura, originally introduced way back in Mirage Block, and we get legendary cards representing Teferi, as well as his family, friends, and foes. The Teferi card in this set is also incredibly unique. It's got several alternative pieces of artwork, making it a nightmare for collectors with all the timey-wimey stuff around him rippling in different places. Its abilities aren't hugely powerful, but can actually be used on either player's turn, and that's pretty cool. At the present time, Core Set 2021 is the most recent set to have the words Core Set in its name. Like I mentioned last time, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is sort of a core set, but not 100%. As well as being about Teferi, this set also had a bit of a pets theme. Pack Leader was printed as a lord for dogs, which as of this set are actually called dogs rather than hounds, and Feline Sovereign was printed for cats, although cats have already had their fair share of lords. Even though Feline Sovereign grants all cats protection from dogs, this set isn't just about their rivalry. The Buyer Box promo, Rin and Seri Inseparable, features a cat and dog pair who are just the best of friends. They're a fun commander, sort of encouraging you to build 2 tribes at once, and they're also the last Buyer Box promo in the game to be a mechanically unique card, rather than just alternative art for a pre-existing card. But hey, that's probably a good thing. Like I've said before, core sets often include powerful creatures to draw in enfranchised players, as well as the newer players they're designed to appeal to. Core Set 2021 gave us reprints of Massacre Worm, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, and Baneslayer Angel, the last of which honestly scarcely impacted Standard at all, showing how much the game's power level has ramped up since Core Set 2010. But the most powerful creatures in this set weren't reprints. Elder Gargaroth is a 6/6 with Trample, Reach, and Vigilance. Whenever you attack or block with the Gargaroth, you can either draw a card, gain free life, or create a free beast token, and all of this for only 5 mana. There's something called the Vanilla Test, which enables you to evaluate how usable a card is for its mana cost. Basically, you compare its creature's cost to its stats, and then say, if this card was a vanilla creature, a creature with no abilities, would I still use it? Elder Gargaroth completely demolishes the vanilla test. Like, it passes it by an absolutely hilarious margin. 6/6 for 5 mana? Yeah, that'll do. And then pop in a whole bunch of evergreen keywords, as well as a whole bunch of other nonsense that happens whenever it attacks or blocks. But even so, it's still not the most powerful creature in the set. No, that honour goes to Terror of the Peaks, which will be our card to represent the set, as only a 5/4 for 5 with flying, Terror of the Peaks isn't as immediately busted as the Gargaroth, but the fact that the opponent needs to pay free life in order to type with any spells is a nice touch. But what really makes Terror of the Peaks so, well, terrifying, I guess, is that whenever you play a creature, Terror of the Peaks deals damage to any target equal to that creature's power. So every creature in your deck is now functionally a removal/burn spell. Ooh, and Terror isn't even legendary, so you can play multiple Terrors and deal damage equal to twice all of your creature's power whenever you bring any of them out. Whilst the ability of Terror of the Peaks to destroy your opponent's board is clear, it can also rip away their life total at an incredible speed. Once Terror of the Peaks hits your opponent's board, you either remove it or you will be dead within a handful of turns at the absolute maximum. In September of 2020, Zendikar Rising spun its way into stores like a double-faced card flipping into action. This is our 3rd trip to Zendikar, now with fewer screaming eldritch horrors from beyond the blind eternities. So, that's always nice. This set had a really interesting take on tribal themes. You could build around 4 classic RPG classes: Warriors in red and white, Clerics in white and black, Rogues in black and blue, and Wizards in blue and red. So far, this sounds pretty standard. Warriors care about equipment, Cleric like life gain, Wizards like instant and sorceries, etc, etc. But where Zendikar Rising shakes things up is through the party mechanic. So there are some cards which care about the number of creatures in your party. Your party contains up to 4 creatures: a warrior, a cleric, a rogue, and a wizard. If you have all 4, you're considered to have a full party. This means cards like Archpriest of Iona provide little bonus effects, but also you get incremental bonuses just for having a few creatures in your party. For example, the card Spoils of Adventure costs 1 less for every creature in the party. Now, Party was conceptually really cool, and it kind of sort of worked in Limited, but unfortunately it was way too underpowered to have any real impact on Standard. One card which did impact Standard, however, was Omnath, Locus of Creation, which got banned, just like Oko and Uro before it. Yeah, I was sort of in two minds about whether or not I should make Omnath my card to represent this set. I mean, this is the 4th super powerful busted card I've mentioned in this video alone, and Zendikar Rising was honestly a really fun set. And there are lots of other cards I could talk about, like Skyclave Apparition, Luminarch Aspirant, or even Feed the Swarm, which was the debut of targeted mono-black enchantment removal. Ultimately though, I couldn't really justify not putting Omnath here. Like I said when I was talking about Kaladesh a few videos back, this is sort of an era where more powerful standard cards are being printed and standard bans are a pretty regular occurrence. Although Kaldheim had a problematic card, which I'll be talking about next video, broadly this has settled down. Well, at least for the moment. Anyway, back to Omnath. Omnath, Locus of Creation is a 4-colour creature. They're every colour apart from black. Omnath actually started life as the mono green card, Omnath, Locus of Mana, way back in Worldwake in 2010. Then, in Battle for Zendikar, Omnath must have gotten really mad at the Eldrazi, because they gained red and became Omnath, Locus of Rage. In Core Set 2020, Omnath gained blue and became Omnath, Locus of the Royal, and finally, with Zendikar Rising, Omnath gained white and became what is currently their final form, Omnath, Locus of Creation. Omnath is a 4/4 for 4 mana, albeit 4 mana from lots of different colours. When Omnath enters play, you draw a card. Then, whilst Omnath is in play, playing a land on your turn gives you 4 life, playing a second land gives you 1 mana of every colour apart from black, and playing a third deals 4 damage to each opponent and every planeswalker they control. Now, Omnath entered Standard in a Zendikar set, meaning landfall was a central mechanic. There were plenty of ways to bring multiple lands into play in a single turn, everything from Evolving Wilds to Scale the Heights to Roiling Regrowth. The consensus is that Omnath managed to slip through the cracks without their powers being noticed because of 2 misconceptions. Number 1, Wizards imagined it would be harder to play multiple lands in a single turn than it actually was. As I outlined above, there are plenty of ways to play multiple lands in a single turn in Standard. With a properly constructed deck, you could play 2 lands basically every turn. And number 2, it was imagined that it would be harder to run 4-coloured decks in Standard than it actually was. But the presence of Pathway lands, Lotus Cobra, and the general abundance of ways to fix mana in most modern sets ensures that this wasn't an issue, and Omnath entrenched themselves as a fearsome menace in Standard. Honestly, it's a bit of a shame. This version of Omnath was probably designed to be a wacky 4-colour landfall commander, and it is, but it also ended up being a super busted Standard powerhouse that ended up getting banned. Still, at least it only ended up getting booted out of Standard and Historic, unlike Oko, Uro and Lurrus, who will destabilise many more formats. Hey guys, a quick side note before we get to the conclusion. In the last episode, we conducted a poll to determine people's thoughts on the Golos ban. As of the 21st April 2022, 118 of you have replied. If we group together the scores for strongly agree and agree slightly, and the scores for disagree strongly and disagree slightly, then it looks like this. 38% of people agree with the ban, 35% of people, myself included, don't feel terribly strongly about it, and 27% of people object. In other words, this is still a pretty close run thing, and folks are pretty evenly divided on it, but on the whole, we're leaning towards acceptance. So then, let's do another poll, because I enjoy them. We've talked a lot about powerful cards in this episode, and now, whilst Magic has probably brought its power down a bit since 2020, the game is still at a pretty heightened level of strength compared to how it's been at many points in its history. Do you guys think, on the whole, the current power level of Magic is too high, just right, or not quite high enough? Let me know in the poll which I'll be accompanying this video with. But yeah, let's wrap things up properly now. We've looked at some really strong cards on this episode, but on the whole, things will be a lot calmer in the sets to come. Kaldheim's a Norse-inspired world of longboats and legends. Strixhaven's a magical school full of owls and adventure. Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is, of course, based on Dungeons and Dragons. And finally, Innistrad Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow are horror-based sets based around vampires and werewolves. I'll see you then.